Hi guys, Doge here with a new video, and this video will be a stats checkup video, a meta-analysis video before a new patch. Because why? So we can do another video afterwards and compare the stats from different specs and classes that got buffed and nerfed, and if the evolution has been changed between those specs. But also just in general, I think people now have the meta grasped, and we will see the 1800 plus and the 2100 plus. I'm not going to bother to check 2400 because obviously there's not much to check because there's just not a lot of 2400. Whenever I'm putting 2400 in the US, you have 0 players, and in the EU you have also 0 players because the deflation of the ladder is quite real. So let's start right away with the US, and I'm going to talk about the EU because I do feel like there is a meta difference between them, although again it is not that different. Like every single class and every single spec is kind of the same, but the regions kind of play differently for some reason. Now, a few things to note. It is really weird in a season 1, already discussed it multiple times, but in Solo Shuffle it is very weird because in Dragonflight it didn't happen, that ranged specs are literally more than melee specs. And again, I'm going to reiterate, for me it is a very ranged DPS meta in Solo Shuffle and in threes. You have still some melee specs that are swimming above the melee, which is normal because a few specs are a bit stronger versus ranged than others. For example, I think feral druids are quite good versus ranged DPS, depending on who they are. For example, ferals versus warlocks, it is actually quite of a good matchup for them. And then you have like windwalkers and unholy decays that kind of do fair or have a fair shot versus them. Then you have obviously the specs that are not that good right now, like for example enhancement and false decay, and other specs that are like depending on their balancing, for example outlaw rogue. But let's discuss. So we see there is a lot of ranged DPS currently, 3,508 in the US for 3,337 melees, and if you go to EU, it is the same. You have more range than melees, and healer wise they have 2.4 like 2.5k healers in the EU, and in the US you have 2.2k healers. So obviously it is kind of harder to climb as a healer, at least outside of like getting 1800. I think 1800 is quite of a grind, but you can reach. But I think once you have like a higher MMR or CR above 1800, it becomes harder because every single win is very much hard to get, and then you have like a lot of meta specs where you don't get a lot of auto wins because of that. But to discuss the meta, we do first and foremost US. You see still a lot of affliction warlocks, and that is still a reality, but now it is going to get nerfed, and those nerfs are really not soft. It doesn't mean that affliction warlocks are not going to be good, because I think Shadow Bolt is still hurting a lot. A Haunt is still hurting a lot. Malefic Rupture itself does a lot of damage as well. But you do remember that every single Shadow Bolter you're doing, every single Nightfall proc that you're going to spend, every single Haunt that you're going to do, every single Malefic Rupture spam that you are able to do is going to get nerfed because of the many procs that has those effects, but those spells itself are not nerfed enough to be obsolete. So I do feel like Affliction Warlock is still going to be very strong, but depending on how the buffs are for different specs, for example Arms Warrior, and depending on specs that get nerfed over the whole patch note, it does feel like Affliction Warlock can still exist, but I'm maybe sure that it is not going to be in the God tier section for long. For example, Unholy Decay got nerfed, and I think those nerfs are a bit more significant because it's like death coil base damage and also base disease damage, and that is way harder to come back from search of nerf than, for example, those procs that you are going to do and the damage that you're doing, that is going to get nerfed, but the base damage of Affliction Warlock is still high. All right, so that is my explanation towards those like nerfs that are going to happen on the next reset. But then you have Hunters still like swimming above. That is the same for EU and NA. But I do feel like again, it's really meta dependent. You have some metas where you're going to have a rough time, but right now it is not really the case. You still have a lot of casters, and Hunters are actually like faring very well versus casters, and that is why it is actually still strong. Then you have Devastation Evokers. Like, this is not surprising, but it is very surprising to me because, again, I'm going to say that some specs are represented very well on the ladders, but they are really just not that popular in the amount of games played per solo shuffle match. For example, I'm going to give you the activity tab. Don't know if I can actually show you a lot of stuff. For example, it's solo shuffle, and there's 72 hours played. So right now, I'm going to give you a good example so you can understand, right? We have 1,507 Devastation Evoker games, right? In the US, across 16,000 lobbies. I think people should again understand how popularity works towards the whole like ladder representation. You have 15,000 Devastation Evokers, and out of those 15,507 games played, lobbies played, you have around 528 above 1800. Another stat that is very interesting, we have 13,580 balanced druids played in the 72 hours that went past. You have 16,120 lobbies played. You have 96k rounds of shuffle played, and out of them you have 13,580 balanced druids. Okay, and you still have 101 rated above 1800. So you do understand that the ratio amount of Devastation Evokers, that again, realistically, you don't have 15,000 Devastation Evokers playing. Obviously, you have Devastation Evokers that are more spamming games. The same for Balanced Druids, right? But out of the amount of Devastation Evokers that you see in 72 hours, you have 5 times more Devastation Evokers above 1800, while having kind of the same amount of people playing the spec, right? So that is crazy how much representation to popularity ratio it is. I'm going to give you another example, because then again, I'm going to give you more examples. Devastation Evoker has 15,507, like I said, they were seen in those amount of lobbies. You see 15,507 Devastation Evokers. You have 90,000 Arms Warriors that has been playing in solo shuffle in 72 hours. Now, it is not 19,000 Arms Warriors, but 19,000 played, approximately games played by spec, right? So this is like how it's written, approximately games played by spec. So you have 19,000 Arms Warriors shuffle rounds. That's how you have to count, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's not like this, but anyways, it doesn't really make sense because how the numbers are. But overall, this is like the popularity of the spec. You have a lot of more Arms Warriors that are playing the game than Devastation Evokers, and that is also what you are going to see in most lobbies. If you're like queuing for solo shuffle, you are more likely to see Arms Warriors than Devastation Evokers, except whenever you're going higher, you will see way more Devastation Evokers than Arms Warrior, because you don't have a lot of Arms Warrior above 1800. And this example is, again, 127 above 1800, while you have 528 Devastation Evokers above 1800. And this is again this is kind of like a bit weird how the numbers are, but it does make sense. You see a lot more Disc Priests than Mistweavers in your games. You see a lot more Holy Paladins compared to Mistweavers. You have a lot of like Unholy DKs compared to Frost DKs. This does make sense, although maybe the numbers are not correct or not correctly showing, because again, it's 96,000 shuffle rounds, but in every single lobby you have 6 characters, right? So again, it might be right, it might be wrong. This is like, again, quite hard to actually, it might be right, because you do 96k times 6, because that is the amount of characters that are into one shuffle round, and I think the numbers are going to be correct. If someone wants to do the math, you can do that. It might be around approximately correct or not, but I believe those numbers are correct. But it is also showing in game, if you're like starting a soul shuffle game, for example, on a fresh alt or a fresh main, and you are like 1500, 1600, 1700, you will see a lot more arms warriors and devastation evokers. But the higher you're going to see a lot more devastation evokers. You're going to see a lot of affliction warlocks. That is just how representation works. But that aside, it has been a very long part of the video, but I wanted to explain you guys again that the popularity of the spec is not big, but you have a lot of representation, which is actually telling. For example, Fury Warrior, you have a lot more. You have 571 above 1800, but you also have 29,000 Fury Warriors rounds played. So it is like incredibly more than devastation workers. It is times 2 pretty much, but you have kind of the same representation above 1800. So you need to understand, like, it means that if you're playing a devastation evoker, you have more chances to be 1800 than on your Fury Warrior. That is how you actually need to interpret these numbers. Anyways, on the top 4 of the meaties are, so unsurprisingly, Unholy Decay, Fury Warrior, Windwalker, and Feral Druid. Feral Druid are kind of going off without a nerf on the next patch. The nerf is very, very little, and you could just like swap out the PvP talent and you would not notice anything. While, for example, you have Fury Warrior, I think it got like hit the previous patch, and Unholy Decay got actually hit by a lot on this patch. Windwalker are also unscarfed, and they're going to probably reign supreme around the meaties with Feral Druid. And it does seem like Fury Warrior might be replaced really soon by Arms Warrior, because again, I do believe that the buffs are good for Arms Warrior. They do lack on the fact that the meta kind of dictates how it goes for them. If Fury Warrior gets nerfed and Arms Warrior gets buffed, it will just replace the place in the meta for Arms Warrior to Fury Warrior. But the issue is that the current meta is not really suited for them. But it might change with like a lot of nerfs towards the top end of the specs. It might be that Arms Warrior are going to be a bit higher. We'll have to see. But Arms Warrior is actually doing fairly well versus Unholy Decay, for example. So it really depends. One thing to note is that Shadow Priest actually is in the top 5 of the most represented specs around 1800, and if you're going for 2100, for example, it is top 3, which is again a substantial number, and that is going to get buffed next patch, next hotfix, pretty much next reset, and it does feel like Shadow Priest is going to probably overtake a higher spot. I know that some people are like memeing on Mind Blast damage and Shadow Word Death damage, which I understand, but most of the damage from Shadow Priest doesn't really come from those 2 spells anyways. It just makes them a bit more relevant. But like right now with the Mind Spike, you can play like Mind Flay Insanity, or you can play Mind Spike Insanity, Insanity Mind Spike, whatever how it's called. But it is like doing well. Like it is maybe a hard spec to play. That is for sure an option, and that could be. But you also need to understand you have a lot of Shadow Priests. Obviously, not everyone is going to be like supremely good on it, because again, it has a learning curve, and it is very immobile, and you're going to get punished because your healer is not capable to heal you, for example. But if you learn the spec, it is actually one of the most influential specs in the Soul Shuffle, because you have actually CC, it is instant, and the healer cannot really defend themselves from it. A silence is very hard to defend on it, a stun very hard, and a fear, once you're like very close to him, it is actually lethal. You have to run away from the Shadow Priest most of the time. So Shadow Priest is actually doing well, and it gets buffed. BM Hunter actually is going to get like an arrow to the knee pretty much. They get like nerfed, like the dot changes on like the barbed collar, I don't know how it's called, the talent that gives more damage to dots. Like whenever you have more dots on the target, you do more damage on your with your pets. That is going to get like literally nerfed. Because it was first and foremost a nerf from the mid-season that is going to happen. That was going to happen anyways, because they have like a lot of changes on the spec tree, which makes sense that you're not going to like over buff it because of the changes, so they're going to nerf it. But they have came out with the nerf way sooner because they saw that BM Hunter actually did a lot of damage when paired with an unholy DK or an affliction warlock or a feral druid, for example. All the best comps currently, even in the AWC, you see that for the BM Hunter, and that's going to get nerfed. So I don't know how it's going to react on the ladder. I don't think it's going to be too much of a change. I think hunters are just fantastic carries in general, and they do survive a lot. But now they got like also a nerf on the survivability, so it means that now hunters are maybe a bit more easier to target without like feeling like you're doing no damage, and they're going to survive a lot less. So I think that is going to be an adaptation that is going to be needed for hunters, especially survival tactics that is going to be a 3 seconds to a 2 seconds damage reduction. That is actually as like 33% nerf towards the PvP talent, and that itself can change a lot. So BM Hunter, MM Hunter, and even Survival Hunters are going to be all hit by that. I think Survival Hunter are like also hit like unjustifiably, but it is what it is. And then we have the bottom 8, the bottom 7, the bottom 6, which are like Destruction Warlock, Elemental Shaman, Balance Druid, and then you have like Demonology Warlock, which is going to get a huge buff this hot like reset. Although I think most of the nerfs that are towards Demonology Warlock are actually AI nerfs. They should literally just buff the AI or change the AI, because sometimes it feels like the demons are not doing their job. If you're playing Demonology Warlock, I think you know what I mean with the Tyrant actually just going melee instead of like casting. That happens. And Fire Mage got like a huge buff to Scorch, especially. Fireball is a non-factor because again you're playing Frostfire most likely. Unfortunately, it doesn't like go towards your Frostfire bolt, but your Scorch damage is going to be really insane. Your Pyroblast is going to get buffed to a point where maybe it's a bit more respectable, although I think it needs actually a 50% buff and not a 20% buff. That is, and Fireball and Phoenix Flame still has like a few issues. So I don't think it's going to jump to S tier for sure, because Frost Mage is still a thing and people are going to choose still Frost Mage over Fire Mage, but it can actually jump onto the ladder, because that's why I'm making this video, because I want to see how many Fire Mages are going to play with the patch and how much of like a change it will be on the top like 1800 plus players. In the 2100 plus, you only have one Fire Mage and one Arcane Mage, which you also see a lot less Frost Mages. That is because the meta is not really that suited for Frost Mages, especially since the nerfs towards the damage. If you see a lot of MM Hunters, a lot of Shadow Priests, a lot of Elemental Shamans, that is going to be natural enemies towards Frost Mages. And the higher you go, the less warriors you see, so the less likely you're going to get free games. And with Feral Druids and Holy DKs being like there, up there, you're not going to like again have free games that you should be able to have in 1800 ranges with like specs that are more easier to kite. But like in the 2100 range, you see clearly you have like a top 4, and you could also like count like Devastation Invoker and BM Hunter. But then again, you have your Balance Druids, Demonology Warlock, Arcane, and Fire being like real losers there, unfortunately. One thing to note is that Feral Druid is like reigning supreme in the US and EU. So for the people that say that Feral Druids are not like God tiers S plus specs, I think I can beg to differ, because again, since the buffs that they got to Rake and Rip, they got literally a top 4 spot now above 1800, which was never the case before, at least in the season 1, right? It was around the 7th place, the 6th place, the 8th place. It was like middle of the road, which was good. It means that it was an A tier spec. Again, I think most specs should like not be like outliers like this. The Feral Druid became an outlier because it is not really a very popular spec to begin with. It has like 22,000 social for rounds played, which is actually more popular than I would think. but it also got a lot of players being above 1800 because of that. And it is also a spec that is notoriously harder to play than other specs, and even then it is like very close to windwalker and actually like catching up to Fury Warrior. So again, I think Feral Druids, very strong, are going to be kept strong because they're like really unchanged. But let's talk about the real losers of the melees. And when I'm talking real losers, I'm also talking about one of the specs that do play, which is Enhancement Shaman. Above 2100, it is like in the US, and count on it, you have like, I think, is Loveless from EU? I think Loveless is from EU, but you have Soul, you have Big Dam, Bigger Dam, whatever, like characters they have. They play multiple alts, and you have 5 above 2100. But whenever you're going to EU, you only have one Enhancement Shaman. And even in 1800 plus, you have 85 of them. So the issue is that Enhancement Shaman is not doing well. Contrary to some popular belief or unpopular belief. If people do think that Enhancement Shaman is fine, I don't know what is fine for you, but this is not fine. It has nothing to do with damage, actually. It has to do with actually like being able to connect and being able to survive. That is mostly the problem for Enhancement Shaman. And off heals can be very strong, but with dampening in mind, it doesn't really matter. And you cannot really off heal whenever you are stunned or CC'd, so it doesn't matter. Having Demon Hunter got buffed, so I'm actually excited to see what is going to happen on the ladder for that. And you still have like rogues being rogues pretty much. I would not say it's middle of the road, but I think in Soul Shuffle it is still always hard to really win games as rogues because you're very dependent on your CDs, very dependent on your CC, and very dependent on your teammate to have a brain, which is not always the case. No offense, obviously, but it is what it is. Even for me, like sometimes I break a blind without me wanting to break a blind. And that could cost a game or could make our game hard. It just is what it is. In Soul Shuffle, without communication, you don't know what the other guy thinks. Or you are like literally like overwriting a stun, overwriting like a CC that should not happen, for example. Outlaw Rogue is still like the worst spec in the game. I kind of believe that right now Farmage got buffed. Outlaw Rogue is probably the only one that really doesn't have any good time on the ladder. And yes, you have like 5 in total Outlaw Rogues above 2100, but you need to remember a lot of the rogue mains and like real rogue mains that are playing like even in the AWC are like notoriously rank 1s. They play sub, they play assassination rogue, and they even play Outlaw Rogue. So those people are going to play every single spec, and they're going to be high rated regardless because they know how to play, they know how to handle, and they know how to carry. But that doesn't mean that it is actually fine. It does not mean that Outlaw Rogue you have like 4 of them and they are above Enhanced and Frost Decay, that it means that it is a better spec than those two. That's not true. One thing to note is also Frost Decay. A lot of praises from me before the season starts. I think a lot of people were actually talking pretty positively about Frost Decay. And again, the black duck of the ladder pretty much. It's like only 3 of them on the US ladder, and you have on the EU ladder only 1. And that is compared to the Unholy Decay, which is a whopping 39 in the EU, and in the US you have 33. So it is like very, very hard for them to be like really relevant on the ladder. And I wonder if they're going to be able to be relevant, because I think it has maybe nothing to do with the rework or no rework. I just think it's just way harder to exist in a Soul Shuffle lobby whenever you don't have it. Like you don't have you have great CC, but it is like, again, you try to use your CC to do your own go and not really doing a CC to make someone enable. For example, affliction warlock, they can easily just fear and do whatever to peel themselves or peel your allies. Frost Decay, if they're using CC to peel, they often just don't get a good go. They need to use their CC to do a go. If you're not doing a go, it means that you're suffering. It means that you are using your CC wrongly or not efficiently enough. That is the issue with Soul Shuffle. For them, it is like an environment where you need to be flexible. You need to be able to say, look, I'm going to use this SC to help my teammates survive. But if you're doing that, you're going to end up with like no pressure. You don't have a mass effect. You don't have a healing absorb. You don't have great support abilities like, for example, Bob. You don't have like a war banner. You don't have like a cyclone that is like spammable CC. Uh, you, in general, you're very annoying and you're going to deal some good damage. You're going to do a good go if you do, and you are permitted to do so. But that is not going to be enough to carry games, and that's why you just see a lot less frost decays. For the people that don't understand how come you only have 3 frost decays, it seems like it was good in solo RPG. While in Soul Shuffle, it's way different. The environment is way different. You can play literally for yourself in solo RPG, and you will have a lot of success. But in like literally Soul Shuffle, where they could just not go for you and they could go for your friend, but you have to decide between surviving and helping him or doing damage and being able to win the game. And that's something that is not always easy to do. Now, on the healer meta side, we have currently in the US Disc Priest still on top. Obviously, that's not going to be changed because, again, that's just how it works. Once you have reached 1800 or more, you're going to stick on the ladder representation. Anyways, it's not like whenever it gets nerfed that you will see 890 into a 500. That is not going to happen. So the people are already like queued and not beat the rank, but pretty much like attained the rank. They're not going to get like demoted. So the number is kind of like the same. It's still like around 39% to 35% of the healer market share. I don't know how I could call it. But Holy Paladin actually got like a lot of stonks. Like they literally were 4th or 5th place. And they jumped like towards its 2nd place, literally tailing Disc Priest and above Preservation Evoker. But again, Preservation Evoker is a weird phenomenon. Like I said, they have 19k popularity on the shuffle rounds lobbies played, but you have 31k Holy Paladins played. So you have, in general, just way more Holy Paladins on the ladder than Preservation Evoker, and they are not that far away from Holy Paladin. So you need to understand, like, it's not because it like is lower than Holy Paladin that it means that it is worse than Holy Paladin. It's not always the case. You need to again see popularity to representation ratio and like compare from spec to spec to understand what is going to be meta, what is going to be good, what requires more work, what is more unpopular, what is more popular. That is always going to be a factor that you need to understand. And then you have the 4th place, which is pretty much tied with Restoration Shaman and Resto Druid. And then obviously you have the 2 like worst students pretty much, which is like mistweavers and Holy Paladin Priest. That can change with the mid-season. Again, mistweaver get like a pretty like extensive rework again. They get like the reworks from a Shadow Priest. They are like literally Shadow Priests. Like they get reworks every single season, every single patch, every single expansion. And I wonder whenever they're going to be done with the like concept art, which is Mistweaver. But if we're talking about EU, let's talk about EU. EU has more healers, obviously, because we have more players in general. But we have 1000 Disc Priests and we have 609 Holy Paladins. And how is it in the EU with the current Soul Shuffle amounts of played games? You have 40k Holy Paladins with 23 Preservation Evokers. So, as you see, the popularity is ×2, and you have you have way more representation on Holy Paladin, but for the amount of people playing Preservation Evoker, you still have a hefty amount of like Preservation Evokers on the above 1800 bracket of ranks. Then you have Resto Druid being more popular than Resto Shaman. That is always going to be a EU thing. You just have way more Resto Druids in general, more mains of Resto Druids in general. But for example, we have 20k Resto Shamans, which is like very close to Preservation Evoker, and you have literally divided 3 the amount of representation above 1800. So you already understand, like, look, Resto Shaman is nowhere near the meta, and it's not going to be happening because they need a lot more buffs than just like a healing stream totem buff and healing wave and healing surge buff. They kind of need help. But I don't think, like, it's also a meta thing. It's also kind of difficult for Resto Shaman to exist in that kind of meta. but it should be a good meta for them. Like you see a lot of affliction warlocks, you see a lot of devastation evokers, frost mages, and generally speaking, resto shaman is actually good versus them. So I think it's like just a balancing thing. They just don't heal enough to like, they don't have enough throughput to be like very good, and that's why they need actually like good buffs. Maybe a Riptide buff again, or like I don't know, maybe a Farseer buff, or like a totemic buff. You have multiple things that they can do to actually make it a bit better. But like for example, resto druids you have like in the EU currently 26,000 in the 72 hours played, which is way more, not way more, but it is more than Preservation Evoker. But you still see like this is clearly the top 3. Like if you are going to say, look, Holy Paladin is better than Preservation Evoker, I would say it is depending on about the lobby. If you're playing like in a caster lobby, I would say Holy Paladin is not that good, but Preservation Evoker is also not that good in those lobbies. But Holy Paladin buffs doesn't do anything. In like lobbies where it's like purely physical damage dealing abilities, or for example with like Fury Warrior, Feral Druid, and let's say an Assassination Rogue, Holy Paladin is going to thrive in those like lobbies, because you can bop like a lot of bleeds, a lot of like goes, and that can make you win games compared to a Preservation Evoker where they might even just die themselves. So I think it is really like purely map and comp dependent, because some maps are better for Preservation Evoker than Holy Paladin. But the top 3 is really secured. But surprisingly, in the EU, you have a lot less mistweavers and you have a bit more Holy Priest. Now, if you can look at the 2100 bracket, you have like 54 Disc Priest, 25 Holy Paladins, and 22 Preservation Evokers, like I said, the clear top 3. And then you have a top 4 or top 5, at least the top like less, like the mid pack, I would say, which is Resto Druid and Resto Shaman. And then you have like one Mistweaver above 2100, and you have no Holy Priest above 2100. And whenever you're looking at the US, you still have 35 Disc Priest, 21 Holy Paladin, 16 Preservation Evoker, and then here you have more Resto Shamans, which is 4, and then 2 Mistweavers, which are like always the same mains pretty much. Those are like the one tricks, and the one Resto Druid, which is also probably a one trick. And then the Holy Priest being like left out, which is quite obvious. If I have to choose, I would say Holy Priest is worse than Mistweaver. But I think it's because Mistweaver is a bit more flexible. You can choose to go fist weaving, and you can go cast a Mistweaver depending on the lobby, and it also depends if you have the gear for it. And they do kind of scale okay, it just is that they do get whenever it's like getting a very long match. And Holy Priest just doesn't have the tools to like save themselves or their allies at the longest duration matches. So this is pretty much the meta review. I would say like the stonks, like right now, the best specs in melee: Feral Druid, Unholy DK, Fury Warrior, Windwalker. Those are the 4 best, I would say. If I have to choose right now. And then obviously the best like range DPS, I would say for Soul Shuffle, Affliction Warlock, you have your Hunters, your Shadow Priest, your Devastation Evokers, and I would say like again, it's very tough. You could say also Frost Mages, but I think since the nerfs, it is not that impressive anymore. It is very annoying though. Like if you're a warrior, I understand you're not going to love facing a Frost Mage, but they have so many natural enemies that they're not going to be performing as well as you would think. So again, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I love making those kinds of videos and analytics that are like talking about how the game is and the metagaming is. Please, for the love of God, don't actually take the AWC and say this is the meta, because this is nowhere near the same. Social Fall has, first and foremost, already nothing to do with trees, but it has a lot less to do with AWC as well. AWC, you can choose to play jungle, you can choose to play Ebola, you can choose to play BM Hunter, Unholy DK, for example. You can choose to play Shadow Play, you can choose your comps. But in like FMP, for example, you can also choose that, but you cannot choose in Soul Shuffle. In Soul Shuffle, you have to play with your your skill, but also your prevention, and try to be adaptable as well. Try to know that you don't have the communication with your ally to set up a CC, so you have to play around that as well. AWC is very different. So again, like sub rogues, for example, in AWC, it is like literally S plus. But in the soul shuffle meta, I would never say that subtlety rogue is right now S plus. Maybe at the highest level, maybe if you're 2400 plus, if you're a rank 1, yes, sub rogue is S plus. You can keep it, you can stay like this. Because it's always going to be like this. It doesn't matter how many nerfs it gets. I guess with the mid-season, with the vanish nerfs, it could be interesting. But I would say a tier list in a meta should not be defined by rank ones and should not be defined by the top players, and especially also not the AWC, because it has nothing to do with the soul shuffle. It's AWC already has nothing to do with threes, but it has also a lot less to do with soul shuffle. So again, try to dissociate both. If that's like the end word, as some people are actually like staying till the end. I hope this message would be enough to convince you not comparing those two. Again, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.